Welcome to the world of science. Everything you're seeing on the screen behind me here is all science.
Science can be about frogs, Mars, sharks, volcanoes, and even our own brains.
Science can be about so many different things, and that makes science pretty special, but it can also make it kind of hard to say exactly what science is.
Science is the study of everything around us. Science is just a way of describing pretty much everything that goes around in the world. It's probably the way things work.
It's like doing experiments to find out things, different things.
Like finding out how the way things grow.
Science is the study of matter and everything, really.
Study of stuff.
I think science is just like learning how things are like, yeah.
The study of the world around you and creatures that live in it, plants, all sorts of things, even the earth itself.
There are lots of different aspects to science. Each looks at different things. For example, astronomy is about stars and space, and biology is about living things.
But one thing connects all the different branches of science, and that thing is asking questions. Questions like, how do spiders make webs? How do plants make oxygen? Why did the dinosaurs die out? What makes waves? What makes lightning? Do I have to look like Albert Einstein to become a scientist? Why does the Earth spin? Is it spinning now? Why can't I feel it? How old is the Earth? How far away is the sun? How do mobile phones work? What is MP3 really? Why is the sky blue? Why is Antarctica so cold? All the branches of science are about noticing what's going on in the world around you, asking questions about it, guessing what the answer might be, and then testing those guesses to see which one's right.
This way of finding out about stuff is called the scientific method. It sounds pretty simple, hey? Ask a question, guess the answer, and then test your guesses.
But if it's done properly, it really works. We'll be taking a closer look at the scientific method a little bit later. We'll also be looking at some different branches of science, like biology, chemistry, and physics.
You can do science on top of a mountain, by a river, in the ocean, and even in space. When you're at school, you'll do a lot of your science in the lab. Before you go into the lab, you need to understand a few rules because science can be dangerous. But don't worry, follow your teacher's instructions and don't carry out your own experiments without checking with your teacher first. In the lab, you'll be dealing with stuff that's flammable, stuff that's toxic, and corrosive stuff like acids. Sometimes you'll have to wear protective clothing and safety glasses. You'll learn how to use equipment like the Bunsen burner, how to measure and mix things,
and how to record the results of your experiments. I can't wait!
These guys are going to use the scientific method to solve a problem. They're going to observe something happening, guess why it happened, and then test one of their guesses.
Scientists are the type of people who notice things around them and wonder why things are the way they are. They use the scientific method to solve all kinds of mysteries and puzzles, like how bees fly, or why planets are different sizes. Let's take a look at the scientific method in action. First, observe something happening.
Then you ask questions. What makes a car ski? It's time to do some brainstorming. Come up with lots of guesses. Use your imagination to its fullest capacity. These guys thought that there may be more than one factor involved. For example, speed might be a factor, and the road surface too.
So, if you wanted to do a skid, what would be a really good surface to skid on? A slippery surface, right?
These guys thought a wet road would be better than a dry road for skidding on. And ice would be the best surface of all. But what's the difference between a surface that's slippery and one that's not?
It's less rough.
So, a slippery surface is less rough than a non-slippery surface. That sounds pretty likely, but how can we test it to see if it's actually true? First, we have to turn our guess into a hypothesis.
Here's a hypothesis. An object will slide more easily on a smooth surface than on a rough one.
A hypothesis is a long name for a guess that you can test to see if it's true or not. If you can't test it, it's not much use as a scientific explanation. I'll show you what I mean.
Say I came up with a theory that there were invisible aliens with a huge invisible magnet lurking above the car. And just as the car got to here, it was lifted into the air by the magnet, just a tiny bit so you could hardly notice. And that's why it skidded across the tarmac.
It's a cool theory, but you can't prove it or disprove it.
So even though it might be true, it's not a testable hypothesis.
So, let's take a look at our hypothesis again. An object will slide more easily on a smooth surface than on a rough one. We should be able to test that.
The students are going to test a bunch of different surfaces, like sandpaper, carpet, and even powder on wood. They'll measure the force needed to drag a wooden block across each surface, using one of these spring balancers. You measure how far the spring stretches using the scale on the side, and that tells you how much force you're using.
We're going to check back later and see how the experiment's going. But right now, let's take a look at some chemistry. What is stuff? What are things made of? What's milk made out of? Or dirt? Or lipstick? What's the stuff in batteries that makes the electricity?
Chemistry is the study of matter, and matter is all around us. Matter is anything that takes up space, like plants, buildings, stars, you and me, the whole lot.
Even air is matter. It's so thin you can walk through it, but it's still there, and you can feel it. You'd soon notice if it wasn't there.
Chemistry studies matter, and matter is made of atoms. I guess you've already heard of atoms, and you know atoms are very tiny, tiny little particles, too small to see with a magnifying glass, or even an ordinary microscope. But did you know that even though there are millions of different kinds of matter, there are actually only about 100 different types of atoms? If you go into a chemistry lab, or look in a chemistry book, you'll probably find a table of the elements. That's a list of the 100 or so different types of atoms. When different kinds of atoms combine together, they can make materials that have completely different properties.
For example, hydrogen and oxygen are both gases. Hydrogen is extremely flammable and dangerous.
But when two hydrogen atoms combine with an oxygen atom like this, we get a completely different substance called H2O, also known as water. And water's not exactly flammable. It has very different properties to the hydrogen it's made of. Most substances, like water or plastic or wood, are made from different types of atoms joined together. That's why there are so many different types of matter in the world, even though there are only about 100 different types of atoms.
There are 3 states of matter: solid, liquid, and gas. All matter exists in one of those states. However, there is one substance that occurs naturally in all 3 states, and that's water, or H2O.
Water vapor is a gas that's found in the air all the time, especially when it's humid. We're all used to liquid water, and many people will be familiar with solid water as well, especially if they live in a very cold area where it snows. Other substances can also change between those 3 states of matter. Even solid rock can be melted into liquid rock if the temperature's high enough. Yeah, lava is liquid rock. And, if the temperature's cold enough, gases can turn into liquids. Some substances can change from a solid state straight into a gas without becoming a liquid. Frozen carbon dioxide is usually called dry ice because when it's frozen solid, it looks like normal ice. But dry ice doesn't melt into a liquid, it just turns straight into gas. That's called subliming. So carbon dioxide in its solid state is called dry ice, and it's pretty cold, much colder than the water ice in your freezer. Dry ice is about -80 degrees. Check out what it does to this flower. This beaker is full of dry ice and a liquid called methylated spirits. If we used water, it would already be frozen, because the temperature is well below zero. But the metho remains liquid. That's what you call snap frozen. So what do you think of the natural world around you? The stuff that's alive. Do you find it interesting? Do you like whales or lizards or birds? Do you like jungles? Or fungi? Or Venus flytraps?
The study of living things is called biology. There's something for everyone in biology.
There are so many different types of living things. On land, in the air, underwater and underground. But what makes something alive? Some things are obviously alive. They move around a lot, grow bigger over time, and make a lot of noise. With some other things, it's harder to tell if they're alive or not, like corals, jellyfish, or mould.
But you can tell, because all living things have some things in common. For example, almost all living things need oxygen.
Some animals get oxygen from air using their lungs. Some take it from water using their gills. Some even absorb air right through their skin. Plants need oxygen too. They have tiny holes in their leaves that let gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide move in and out. All living things need food. Animals get their food by eating things like plants, insects, and other animals. Plants make their own food using energy from the sun. And of course, everything that eats food produces waste. Even plants excrete waste. During the night, plants release waste gases through their leaves. What else do living things have in common? They can all move. Some living things move so slowly we can only see them moving when they're sped up. And everything alive can respond to its environment. A dog will bark when it senses a stranger, and a plant growing in a dark spot will bend towards the sun. The dog and the plant are both responding to their environment. Living things can all reproduce. The simplest living things reproduce by just splitting in two, but most living things need two individuals to be able to reproduce. That includes flowering plants and most animals, including those mammals known as humans.
Finally, all living things change as they get older. They grow up, then they get old, and eventually they die.
For some living things, this whole process only takes a few days. For others, it can take centuries. If you look very closely at an animal or a plant, you will see that it is made of tiny box-like cells. Everything alive is made of cells. The simplest living things are made of just one cell. This may be how life began, with single-celled organisms like this. Now, life is much more complicated.
We humans have more than 1 million cells in our bodies.
And there are all different types, such as skin cells, and nerve cells, bone cells, and muscle cells. They all look different and do different jobs. Biologists study all of life. They look at it close up through microscopes, and they look at the big picture, exploring ecosystems like jungles and oceans that contain many different kinds of living things. So far, biologists have listed about 1.5 million different types of living things on Earth, but new plants and animals are still being discovered.
In the last few years, biologists have listed new varieties of frogs, monkeys, lizards, fish, even a new type of whale. And that's just the beginning. Biologists say they haven't listed even half of the different living things on Earth. Have you ever wondered what electricity is? Or gravity? Why hot things glow? If sound can travel underwater? Or across space? How come you can go faster on a bike than you can run, even though it's still your legs doing all the work? These questions belong to the branch of science called physics. Physics is connected to all of the other branches of science because physics looks at the rules and laws that affect everything in our universe, from atoms to animals, from planets to basketballs.
Using physics, you can work out how to put a rocket in space, or figure out how mobile phones work, how to build a laser or a satellite, or an X-ray machine. Physics is the science behind most of our modern technology. One of the main topics in physics is energy and forces. A force is a push or a pull that can make things move or change direction, or slow down, or even change shape. If there were no forces, nothing in the universe would move. Some forces are obvious. You push on the pedals of your bike and it makes it move. But other forces are a bit more mysterious because they're invisible. Forces like gravity and electrostatic forces and magnetism. You study all forces in physics.
Hey, remember the skidding car? That was all about a force called friction. Friction happens whenever two things rub together. Let's have a look and see how the experiment's going.
These students are going to test a few different surfaces: sandpaper, carpet, plain wood, oil on wood, powder on wood, detergent on wood, and paper. All kinds of surfaces. Right now, they're trying to predict which surface will create the most friction and which the least.
Yeah, but they're the ones we do. Sandpaper will have the most friction, won't you? Sandpaper, yep. So put a 1 in front of it. Carpet will have second.
3, I think it's not. Next one,
I think probably oil would be last because it's most slippery, and if the wood's completely coated in the oil, then it'll probably go quite smoothly.
Then they do the experiment. They're measuring the friction of each surface 3 times and then calculating the average of those 3 results.
1.75.
That's to make sure one wacky result doesn't ruin the whole experiment.
2.1.
So, what's the conclusion? What surface creates the most friction?
Sandpaper.
Sandpaper. Sandpaper?
What was our hypothesis again?
An object will slide more easily on a smooth surface than on a rough one. Guess what? I think we've proved our hypothesis correct. It's a scientifically proven fact. Scientists are people who notice things about the world, ask questions about it, and test to see if their guesses are right. That means almost everyone's a scientist. At least some of the time, anyway.
A mechanic trying to work out why a car won't start. A vet trying to find out what's wrong with a sick animal. Or a police officer solving a crime. All use the scientific method as a great tool for solving problems in the real world.
Science is for anyone wanting to learn about things and find solutions to unanswered questions.
Chemistry, biology, and physics are the main branches of science. Each of these branches is so big that no one understands a whole branch in every detail. So, today, there are many different types of scientists working in each branch to discover many different things. For example, if you are a biologist, you could be a botanist who works with plants, or a zoologist who studies animals, a marine biologist looking at life in the sea, a microbiologist looking through a microscope, or a paleontologist checking out fossils.
There are a lot of different kinds of scientists, that's for sure. Science just keeps getting bigger and bigger. New discoveries are being made every day.
But there are still new species to be discovered, new materials to be developed, new planets to be found and explored.
There's so much left to do. You'd better get started.